Rain hit the windshield like memory clawing its way back. They laughed at my old truck, till the water rose higher than their pride. When the flood came, their engines drowned, but mine kept singing. Now my street bears my name, and their silence still echoes. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. My name is Harold. I'm 56 years old, and this is how I learned that silence can speak louder than revenge. The rain had started before dawn, a steady hum against the roof. By afternoon, it turned violent. Sheets of water slamming the street, gutters overflowing, drains choking on leaves. I sat by my window, watching the water rise. My old Ford F-150 parked across the curb, still impatient like an old soldier. Folks had laughed at it for years. They said it belonged in a museum or a junkyard, especially Calvin, my neighbor. He drove a new silver SUV, always spotless, always showing off its touchscreen and voice controls like a toy from the future. He used to point at my truck and chuckle, "Harold, man, that thing looks like it runs on prayers." I'd smile, sip my coffee, and say, "Maybe so, but prayers never ran dry." That truck had history. Bought it used when my son was 10. Hauled lumber for my porch. Moved my daughter to college. Carried food to church drives. Every dent had a story. Every patch of rust a memory. Folks these days traded cars like sneakers. But me, I kept what proved itself. That afternoon, thunder rolled over our neighborhood like judgment. The power flickered, then died. I stepped out onto the porch, boots sinking into puddles, and the smell hit. Wet earth, gasoline, and distant pine. The air felt heavy, charged. Somewhere down the block, a transformer popped, blue sparks cutting through gray rain. Calvin was outside too, yelling into his phone. "Yeah, man, the street's flooded. I can't even start the car. It's electric, for God's sake." He noticed me watching. "Hey, Harold, that antique of yours still working?" I looked over the railing. "She's resting, but she's never failed me yet." He laughed, shaking his head, disappearing back into his garage. I didn't bother replying. I just walked to my truck, opened the door, and sat behind the wheel. The seat creaked, the air smelled faintly of oil and tobacco, and when I turned the key, she rumbled awake, strong as ever. That sound alone calmed me. By 7, the street turned into a river. Cars floated crookedly. The ditches overflowed. I watched through the wipers as water licked the porch steps. Somewhere nearby, a woman screamed. Then another shout, higher, panicked, a child's. I didn't think, just moved. I grabbed the flashlight, rope, and the old tow chain I kept from my construction days. The rain slapped my face, cold and mean, but the truck pushed forward, tires cutting slow through the current. I switched to low gear and kept my hand steady. Floods don't care for pride. They test patience, skill, and preparation. Down near Elm Street, I found them. 2 cars half submerged. A man waving a flashlight from his roof. Kids crying in the back seat of another. "Hold tight!" I shouted through the storm. I tied the chain, pulled one car out inch by inch, engine grunting like a living thing. The exhaust hissed underwater, but the Ford never hesitated. "Sir, you good?" a young man asked from a porch as I passed. "Still breathing," I said, smiling. "That's good enough." When I circled back toward our block, Calvin's SUV was halfway under, alarms wailing like a dying animal. He stood on his porch steps, barefoot, holding his phone like it could save him. I stopped near his driveway. "Need a hand?" I yelled. He hesitated. Pride's a heavy thing when the water's already to your knees. "You sure that thing won't stall?" he shouted back. I grinned. "She's older than your car, but smarter, too." The rope tightened, the truck dug in, and slowly, painfully, the SUV rolled free, tires dragging mud. Calvin just stood there, drenched, speechless. When it was done, he walked over, rain streaking his face. "Man, Harold, I didn't think that old thing could move like that." I shrugged. Age don't stop purpose. We stood in silence, just the sound of rain softening into drizzle. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say more, but no words came. I drove the truck back home, parked her right where she'd always been, front and center. Later, when the county rescue trucks arrived, The road was littered with debris and pride. I helped them direct folks, showed them where the current had been strongest. The sheriff nodded as he took notes. You did good, sir. Might have saved a few lives tonight. Just kept my tools ready, I said. At home, I wiped the dashboard with a towel. The old leather shone faintly under the flashlight. On the glove box, taped years ago, still sat a note from my late wife. Don't ever doubt what's still running. Outside, the moon broke through for a second, reflecting off puddles and chrome. The neighborhood was quiet, humbled. I heard Calvin's door creak open. He called out softly, almost embarrassed. Hey, Harold. Thank you. I didn't answer. I just raised my hand, a small wave, and stepped back inside. Some lessons don't need words. Some pride needs water to wash it clean. And some trucks, some hearts, run longer than anyone expects. The morning after the storm, everything smelled like mud and memory. The street was streaked with brown water lines, tree branches, and floating trash cans. The air carried that damp quiet that comes after chaos, the kind where folks step outside slow, blinking at what survived. My boots squelched in the muck as I checked on the truck. She was coated in dirt, but standing proud, a survivor. Calvin's shiny SUV was parked a Betuna. Few houses down, door open, carpet soaked. He was trying to drain it with a bucket, muttering under his breath. I didn't wave, didn't need to. The night before said more than any conversation could. I wiped down my windshield, feeling the grit under the rag. My neighbor across the street, Mrs. Thompson, called out, Harold, baby, you really came through last night. Folks talking about you like you FEMA. I smiled. Just did what needed doing, ma'am, she chuckled. Still, God bless you. Some people waited on help. You were the help. That hit me deep. Because that truck, and the faith that built it, had been called useless more times than I could count. But last night it was the only thing that didn't quit. Around noon, a county official came by. Clipboard, vest, the whole deal. You Harold Grant? He asked. Yes, sir. We got reports you assisted in multiple rescues. We're filing community impact documentation. Need your statement. He handed me a form. I glanced at the header. Filed at the county recorder's office, case number 2025-11873, Fulton County Clerk Office. I signed without ceremony. It wasn't about the credit. It was about respect. The kind earned slow. By the afternoon, the sun started breaking through, glinting off puddles like mirrors. Kids played barefoot in the shallow water, laughing, while grown men dragged ruined furniture onto lawns. Calvin stayed busy hosing down his driveway, trying to rinse off the humiliation. He approached me later, a forced smile on his face. Hey, Harold, you got a minute? Sure. He looked uneasy, hands in pockets. I was wrong, man, about your truck, about you. I didn't speak, just let the silence stretch. He kept talking. I shouldn't have made those jokes. Guess I forgot old things got a way of lasting longer. I nodded. It's easy to forget what built the road when you're busy speeding on it. He gave a small laugh, nervous. You always talk like a preacher? Only when folks stop listening. That night I sat on the porch, the radio humming low with gospel and static. The world smelled like rain turned to steam. My daughter Denise called from Birmingham. Daddy, I saw the pictures. They said you pulled people out with your truck? Yeah, I said. Just lent a hand. She laughed softly. You always say that when you save somebody. Wasn't about saving, I told her. Just doing what's right. There was a pause. Then she said, Mama would have been proud. The words warmed me like sunlight on metal. The next day, the county set up a relief tent at the community center. I brought the truck there to deliver bottled water and canned food. Folks waved as I passed. Kids cheering, old men tipping their hats. It felt strange being seen like that. At the lot, a young volunteer came up. Sir, that your truck? Sure is. He circled it with admiration. Man, that's a classic. Bet she could tell stories. I smiled. She already did. Later, the mayor's office posted on Facebook. A photo of my truck under the headline, "Local resident uses old pickup to rescue families during flood." The comments section filled up fast. People I hadn't spoken to in years tagged me, thanking me. Calvin even left one that said, "Harold's truck might be old, but his heart's brand new." Funny thing, pride. When it breaks, humility seeps in like clean water. A week passed. Life found its rhythm again. The street dried, the lawns yellowed, and folks started washing away the mud of embarrassment. Calvin tried being friendly, waving from his yard, stopping by with small talk. I let him. Sometimes grace ain't about forgiveness. It's about letting someone face what they said out loud. One Sunday morning, I drove the truck to the church fish fry fundraiser. Reverend Coleman met me at the gate. "Brother Grant," he said, smiling wide, "you and that Ford been making headlines. Maybe next time we'll bless her at the altar." I laughed. "She already blessed, Reverend. She's been through the flood." He clapped my shoulder. "Then she knows the scripture. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee." I parked near the pavilion, the smell of fried catfish and cornbread mixing with the faint scent of oil from my engine. Folks gathered around, asking to see the chain, the ropes, the tires that cut through the storm. I let them touch, explain how it worked. Not boasting, just sharing what stayed true. Calvin showed up, dressed clean as always. He came over, nodding slow. "That's her, huh?" "Yep." He studied the dents, the faded paint. "She's beautiful," he said quietly. "She ain't pretty," I corrected. "She's honest." He looked at me, eyes softer. "You know, I filed that insurance claim. They said the SUV's a total loss." I raised an eyebrow. "Guess technology don't float." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess not." Before he walked off, he said, "If you ever thinking of selling her, I'd be honored to buy." I smiled. "Not for sale. She's part of the family." That night, I opened my garage and stared at the truck under the single hanging bulb. The hood gleamed dull but proud. I thought of every mile she'd carried me, every storm, every insult swallowed without reply. I whispered, "We did good, old girl." Outside, thunder murmured faintly again in the distance. Just a reminder. But I wasn't worried. Some storms test you once. Others remind you you've already passed. And somewhere, deep in that quiet street, I knew folks would never look at age the same way again. By the next month, the town had settled back into its ordinary rhythm. Same porch lights glowing, same kids riding bikes through cracked pavement, same gossip floating over hedges. But something subtle had changed. When I drove that truck down Maple Avenue, folks waved first now. People I barely knew nodded with quiet respect. Even the young mechanics at Jenkins Auto stopped their chatter when I pulled in for oil. "Man, that's the flood truck, right?" one of them said, wiping his hands on a rag. "That's her," I replied, patting the hood. "Still running, still faithful." He whistled. "Can't believe she survived that mess. My cousin's Tesla shorted out just sitting in the rain." I smiled. Sometimes the simpler machines outlast the fancy ones. Same with people. The shop fell silent for a beat, that kind of silence that carries a lesson. Later that week, I stopped by the county office to pick up a copy of that rescue filing. The clerk, an older black woman with silver glasses, smiled when she saw my name. "You the man with the truck," she said, flipping through the folders. "We don't get many stories like yours filed under public record." She handed me a stamped copy. At the bottom, the ink still sharp. "Filed at the county recorder's office. Case number 2025-11873. Verified public assistance report." "Guess you're official now," she teased. I chuckled. "Didn't do it for fame, ma'am. Just for peace of mind." "Well," she said, leaning closer, "sometimes God makes sure peace gets notarized." Outside, I stood in the parking lot for a long moment, watching clouds drift across the Georgia sky. The sun glinted off the courthouse windows like polished stone. I folded the paper neat and slid it into my jacket. Not a trophy, just proof that patience still had a place in this world. That afternoon, Calvin came by again. He was dressed down this time. No pressed shirt, no cologne, just jeans and a humble look. Harold, he started, I've been thinking about helping folks prepare better for storms. Maybe start a neighborhood fund for equipment and supplies. That so? Yeah. Figured you could help lead it. You know what's real and what just looks good. I studied him for a second. The man who once laughed at rust was now looking for wisdom in it. All right, I said slowly, but only if it's real help, not a photo op. He nodded. Real help, promise. A week later, we held the first meeting in the community hall, folding chairs, paper cups, and old church fans waving the heat away. People came curious. Calvin opened with a few words, stumbling a bit. Then he turned to me. Harold, he said, would you tell them what you told me about keeping old things ready? I stood up. The room went still. All I said was this: a tool only works if it's loved. That goes for machines, neighbors, and promises. You can buy new all day long, but if you don't maintain what you got, it'll fail when you need it most. A murmur of agreement rolled through the crowd. Some nodded, some clapped. Mrs. Thompson from across the bay street smiled wide. Calvin grinned like a man relieved to share the weight. After the meeting, a young mother came up with her son. Mr. Harold, my boy wants to thank you, she said softly. The kid looked shy, gripping a toy truck. Mama said you saved us. I crouched down. Your mama's the one kept you calm. I just drove. He handed me the toy. You can have it. It's old. I smiled, voice low. That's exactly why it's special. That little moment hit deeper than any headline ever could. By fall, the fund grew. The neighborhood bought sandbags, generators, radios. Calvin organized a small block cookout to celebrate. Smoke from the grill curled into the sky, carrying the smell of ribs and hickory. Gospel played from someone's porch. Sam Cooke, a change is gonna come. Kids ran circles around the yard while old men argued about football scores. Calvin raised a glass. To Harold and his iron faith, he said. I laughed. Don't name no toast after me. The flood did the teaching. He grinned. Then here's to the flood, and to what it taught all of us. Folks cheered, and for once it didn't sound like flattery. It sounded like truth, shared. Later that night, when the food was gone and the music dimmed, I sat in my truck with the door open, letting the autumn air drift in. I looked at her dashboard, the way the light caught the small cracks in the leather. I thought about every person she carried, and every lesson she had proved. Then I heard footsteps. Calvin approached, holding 2 cups of lemonade. He handed me one. I know I said it before, he murmured, but thank you again. You already thanked me, I said. He hesitated. Not properly. He looked down, then up again. I was raised to think value had to shine to be worth something. Guess I needed that flood to wash the nonsense off. I took a slow sip. We all need a good cleaning now and then. We sat in silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. The streetlight flickered above, catching the hood of the truck just right. The rust looked almost golden. Calvin broke the quiet. You ever think of fixing her up? Repainting, maybe? No, I said softly. She earned her scars. They tell her story. He nodded, thoughtful. Wish folks saw people that way. Some do, I said. You just gotta look through the mud. He laughed. A quiet, real laugh this time. Then he got up, gave a little salute, and walked home. When he was gone, I reached over and touched the steering wheel, leather worn smooth by decades of use. The hum of the night felt steady. Cicadas, distant traffic, life moving on. For the first time in years, I felt a peace that didn't need to prove itself. The world had tried to bury dignity under progress, but all it took was one old truck and a flood to remind them, purpose don't age and faith don't rust. The winter that followed came slow, with the soft frost on the lawns and quiet mornings filled with wood smoke. The neighborhood had learned its rhythm again, but folks carried something new, a kind of watchfulness, like they'd finally seen what weather could do and what neighbors could mean. I still drove the truck every morning, rumbling through the same streets, Calvin once mocked me for blocking. Kids waved on their way up to school buses. Old men nodded from porches. Some even called her the rescue ride. I didn't mind. But change has a way of testing what it praises. One Tuesday afternoon, a notice came in the mail. County Infrastructure Modernization Program. Bold letters, official seal, heavy paper. Inside, the letter read, Dear Resident, as part of our neighborhood renewal plan, properties on your street are being evaluated for road expansion and drainage installation. Vehicles considered inoperable or not compliant with current emissions standards will be subject to citation and removal. At the bottom, in fine print, it listed old models, including my F-150's exact year. I read it twice, then a third time. My jaw tightened. That truck had pulled children out of floodwater, and now the same county that filed her heroism wanted her towed away. I went out to the driveway, leaned on the hood. The metal was cold under my palm. I whispered, They don't know what you're worth. Later, I saw Calvin walking his dog. You get that letter too? I asked. He nodded, sheepish. Yeah, but they ain't talking about mine. New cars on the exempt list. Of course it was. You believe that? I asked. He sighed. Ain't right, Harold. Not after what you did. We'll figure something out. I didn't answer. I just looked down the street, where the same county truck that handed out bottled water last summer was now measuring driveways. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the letters spread out under the lamp. Denise called again, her voice warm. Daddy, you sound tired. They say my truck's too old to breathe their air, I said. She laughed softly, thinking I was joking. You mean emissions? Yeah. Seems saving lives don't make her legal. There was a pause, then her tone changed. You keep that truck, you hear me? You got papers, right? I got everything, I said. Title, maintenance, even the rescue filing. Case number 2025-110873. Stamped and sealed. Then let 'em try, she said, firm now. They'll learn something about faith and paperwork. I smiled. You sound like your mama. Good, she said. Then you listen. The next morning I went to the county office again. Same clerk, same gray glasses. I handed her the notice and the rescue file. They want to remove the same truck listed in your records. She frowned, flipping through pages. That can't be right. It's what they mailed. She scanned her computer. Lord, the system flagged it. Automatically. No human checked the list. She looked up. You want me to attach the rescue record to your case? Please. She typed fast, the keys clacking sharp in the quiet. Then she smiled. There, you're exempt. I'll send the confirmation myself. I thanked her, stepped outside, and looked at the courthouse steps glistening with last night's rain. For a moment I felt something like pride, not for me, but for the paperwork that had turned justice into ink. A week later, county trucks rolled down the street, tagging cars. My neighbors watched nervously. The officer stopped in front of my driveway, checked his clipboard, and paused. Then he looked up. You Harold Grant? That's me. He nodded. You're clear, sir. File says you're protected under emergency service exemption. He smiled faintly. Nice truck. Thank you, I said. She served this county longer than most of us. After they left, Calvin came jogging over. You serious? They let you keep it? Got it in writing. I showed him the stamped form. He read it, shaking his head. Man, you got more paperwork than City Hall. Paper keeps memory honest, I said. People forget, but ink don't. The neighborhood cheered when they saw my truck spared. Mrs. Thompson brought cornbread. The Jenkins boys honked as they drove by, and the young mothers clapped from porches. It wasn't just about metal and bolts anymore. It was about what stayed standing when systems didn't. That weekend, at Sunday service, Reverend Coleman told the story from the pulpit. Sometimes, he said, voice deep and certain, the same thing they reject becomes the cornerstone. Sometimes the same old truck they laugh at is what keeps the road alive. The congregation clapped. Calvin caught my eye from across the aisle and nodded slow, a silent amen. After church, he walked up to me outside, breath steaming in the cold air. Harold, you ever thought of starting something bigger? What you mean? Like a foundation, disaster prep, community work, something with your name on it. Folks trust you. You got story, you got proof. I chuckled. I ain't trying to be no poster boy. He smiled. Sometimes the story chooses you. That night I sat in the truck, flipping through my folder, the rescue case, the exemption form, the maintenance logs going back 20 years. My wife's handwriting still marked one old receipt. Change the oil before Easter. Don't skip. I could almost hear her saying it, soft but firm. I looked out at the quiet street. Christmas lights twinkling faintly on wet lawns. The same rain that once drowned our pride now cleaned it. And I realized the flood hadn't just washed through our neighborhood, it had rewired it. Because the real rescue wasn't just in the water, it was in the way people started remembering who they were before they got shiny. Spring came, with the sound of bees and lawnmowers and the smell of cut grass mixed with exhaust. The neighborhood was brighter again, but this time the brightness came from something deeper than fresh paint. Folks smiled longer. They stopped to talk. They looked out for each other. My truck stayed parked in her same old spot, center stage, proud without boasting. The rust shimmered like copper under the sun. Every scrape told a story, and I'd be damned if I let a fresh coat hide them. One Saturday morning, Calvin came by carrying a clipboard and a thermos. "Morning, Harold," he said. "You ready for round two?" "Round two of what?" "Our flood prep project. We got 10 new volunteers. The county wants to feature it on their website." I leaned against the fender. "Feature, huh? Hope they ain't just looking for photos." He laughed. "Nah, they want a story. The one about the truck that kept going." I sighed. "All right, long as they spell my name right." By noon, the whole block gathered at the community center, folding tables lined with sandbags, rope, flashlights, canned food. The walls still smelled like lemon cleaner and fried catfish from last week's fundraiser. Someone had printed flyers with a picture of my truck under the headline, "Iron Faith, Community Preparedness Drive." Calvin gave a small speech, but this time he didn't sound like a man selling something. He sounded like one remembering something. "Last year," he said, "we learned that the oldest thing on this street had the strongest engine and the steadiest driver. Let's keep that same spirit." Applause rippled through the room, honest and unforced. I didn't like attention, but I couldn't deny the pride that came with it. Maybe this was what my wife meant when she used to say, "Faith is more useful when it's seen than when it's shouted." After the meeting, a young county journalist approached me. "Mr. Grant, could we do a short interview? Folks online want to know more about your story." I looked at Calvin. He nodded, smiling. "Go ahead, old man. Tell 'em." I chuckled. "All right, but make it quick. I ain't no movie star." She turned on her recorder. "So, Mr. Grant, what made you trust that old truck enough to drive into a flood?" I thought for a moment. "Trust comes from time, not shine. I kept her running when nobody cared. Guess she returned the favor when it counted." The reporter smiled. "And what do you want people to learn from that?" "That preparation ain't about fear," I said. "It's about respect. Respect for the tools, the people, and the time you've been given. You keep them ready. They keep you safe." She looked genuinely moved. "That's beautiful. Can I quote you?" "Long as you don't make it sound fancy." A week later, the article went live. Harold Grant, the man who drove faith through the flood. Pictures showed the truck half submerged, neighbors waving, kids smiling. The comments came flooding in, people from other towns, even other states. One man wrote, "Reminds me of my daddy's Chevy, still runs." A woman added, "Proof that age don't define usefulness." Someone else said, "We need more men like this in our neighborhoods." I didn't say anything publicly, but inside something quiet settled, the kind of peace that comes after a long wait. The county invited me to a recognition event. Certificates, cameras, a handshake from the mayor. I almost didn't go, but Denise insisted. Daddy, that truck deserves a round of applause, and so do you. So I put on my best jacket and drove downtown. The event hall was bright and echoing, banners with words like service, dedication, community hero. When they called my name, I walked up slow, steady. The mayor smiled for the cameras. Mr. Harold Grant, for your bravery and service during the 2025 flood, we honor you with the County Civil Award of Merit. The applause sounded like rain on rooftops. I held the plaque, simple, gold-edged, heavy. Thank you, I said into the mic. But I just did what any decent man should do. Keep what's useful, help who needs it, and never underestimate what's old. The crowd laughed softly, but they listened, and for once, I didn't feel like the quiet man at the end of the block. When I got home, I placed the plaque on the truck's dashboard instead of a shelf. You earned it, I told her. Later that evening, Calvin came by with a beer in one hand, a grin on his face. Man, you made TV. They showed you on Channel 5. Lord, I said, shaking my head. Next thing you know, they'll want me to start a podcast. He laughed, then looked serious. You changed this place, Harold. You know that. I smiled. I didn't change it. I just reminded folks who they already were. We sat on the porch while the sun dipped low, the air smelling of charcoal and magnolia. Across the street, a kid played with a toy truck in a puddle. I watched him, remembering my own boy, long grown now. Calvin took a slow sip and said, You ever wonder why some things survive storms and others don't? I thought for a moment. Because the ones that bend know when to hold. He nodded, quiet. Guess you're one of those. The street fell peaceful again. The hum of crickets rose. A gospel tune drifted faintly from Mrs. Thompson's radio. Wade in the water. I smiled at the irony. The flood was long gone, but it left behind something cleaner than any rain could wash away. Understanding. And as night settled, I ran my hand over the steering wheel and whispered, We ain't done yet. Because somewhere deep down I knew storms don't end stories. They start the ones that last. By midsummer, word about the Iron Faith truck had spread farther than anyone expected. Strangers came through the neighborhood just to take pictures of it. Young folks with phones, veterans with stories of their own. One man drove up from Alabama, said he'd read about me in the Southern Chronicle. He just wanted to shake my hand. Sir, he said, voice rough with emotion, my daddy had one just like yours. We rebuilt it twice, drove it to church every Sunday. Seeing yours, it's like seeing him again. I smiled, feeling that kind of connection that goes past words. Then he built it right, I said. Some things were made to last longer than we do. That afternoon, Calvin and I stood under the shade of the oak, watching the visitors. You ever think it'd go this far? He asked. I shook my head. Didn't do it for fame, he chuckled. Yeah, but sometimes good work refuses to stay quiet. The flood had rewritten how folks saw the world, but it had also reminded me how small a man's pride looks next to nature's force. Every storm leaves something behind, not just damage, but truth. I kept the truck tuned up as usual. Oil, belts, pressure, fluids, the same rhythm I'd kept for decades. Sometimes I caught myself talking to it like a friend. You holding up all right, girl? I'd say, and the hum of the engine would answer back like a heartbeat. Then came a call from the Fulton County Emergency Office. The same clerk with silver glasses, her tone warmer than before. Mr. Grant, she said, we're updating the county's disaster response roster. Would you consider being part of the volunteer drivers list? You'd be first call if another emergency hits. I smiled. So you mean the old truck's official now? More than official, she said. She's certified. A week later, I received the badge in the mail. A laminated card with my name, my license number, and the line, Emergency Transport Operator, Authorized Vehicle ID, GR 1978F. I held it like something sacred. I showed Calvin that evening. He whistled low. Man, look at that. They went from mocking her to registering her. You got legal revenge and poetic justice in the same stroke. I grinned. Guess that's the Lord's sense of humor. We both laughed, but beneath it there was something weighty, the quiet satisfaction that comes when right wins slow but sure. Around that time, a few new families moved into the neighborhood. Younger couples, most of them working remote, driving shiny cars with whisper engines. They didn't know the story, not yet. One of them, a young man in a crisp polo, stopped me one morning. "Excuse me, sir," he said politely. "That your truck?" "Sure is. Did you know it leaks oil onto the curb sometimes? HOA might send a warning." I looked at him for a second. "Son, that oil's been keeping her heart beating since before you were born." He blinked, unsure what to say. Calvin walked by just then, overhearing. "Careful, young blood," he said, grinning. "That truck got more community credits than your whole street combined." The kid laughed awkwardly and backed away. Later, I saw him reading the framed newspaper clipping in the community hall. After that, he waved every time he passed. Funny how understanding grows, sometimes through words, sometimes through storms. In late August, the county held a resilience parade. Never thought I'd live to see one. The flyer said, "Honoring everyday citizens who prove strength in silence." They wanted me to drive the truck right up front, behind the first responders. I almost said no, but Denise called. "Daddy," she shouted, "let them see what faith on four wheels looks like." So I polished the mirrors, cleaned the seats, and tied a small American flag to the antenna. When parade day came, the streets were lined with people. Kids held signs that said, "Thank you, Harold," an old truck, strong heart. I drove slow, steady, waving through the window. Folks clapped like I was somebody important. Calvin rode shotgun, wearing sunglasses and a grin big as daylight. "Man, we in a parade. Never thought I'd see this day." I laughed. "Don't blink too fast. It'll go to my head." When we passed the courthouse, the mayor stood outside with the clerk, both saluting. I nodded back. Across the crowd, I caught sight of that same kid from the HOA, cheering loudest of all. Afterward, a TV reporter stopped me. "Mr. Grant, people are calling you a symbol of perseverance. How does that feel?" I looked straight into the camera. "Ma'am, I'm no symbol. I'm just a man who believed in maintenance, of engines, of character, and of promises. You keep what's real running, that's all." That line aired on the local evening news. Calvin called it my drop the mic moment. But when I got home later, I sat alone in the garage. The truck was quiet, engine ticking softly as it cooled. I traced a finger along the frame, over the faint scratches of age. "You carried me farther than I ever planned," I said. On the workbench nearby lay every document: title, exemption, rescue case, volunteer badge. My life story written in oil and ink. I realized something then. I hadn't just preserved an old machine. I'd preserved a way of living, where things were cared for, not replaced, where respect had to be earned, not branded. That night I took out my old leather journal, the one my wife gave me years ago, and wrote a single line at the top of the page: "Filed under faith, restored through purpose." Then I closed it gently, like sealing a prayer. By the fall of that same year, the story of my truck had become part of the town's memory. People used it in speeches, in sermons, even in classrooms. The local high school invited me to talk during their community week, resilience in everyday life. I almost said no. I wasn't a man for microphones, but Denise convinced me again. "Daddy," she said, "you don't have to preach. Just tell the truth the way you live it." So one Thursday morning, I parked the truck right in front of Jefferson High. Kids gathered around before I even stepped out. Phones up, eyes wide, asking questions before introductions. "Sir, this the flood truck?" "Yes, ma'am." "Did you really drive it through the water?" I smiled. "Sure did. Didn't plan it. Just did what was needed." They followed me into the gym like I was a guest star. The principal handed me a small microphone, but I held it low, talking slow and steady. "I ain't no hero," I said. "I'm just a man who didn't give up on what worked. This truck, she's old. So am I. But both of us still got purpose." Some of the students laughed softly, not mockery, just that kind of laughter when something true lands deeper than they expected. I told them about the flood, about the neighbor who mocked, about how faith sometimes sits quiet under rust. When I finished, one girl raised her hand. "Mr. Grant," she asked, "what made you not give up when people laughed?" I paused before answering. Because when you know what you've built with your own hands, laughter sounds lighter than truth. Let folks talk. Storms always decide who's right. The gym went still. Even the teachers nodded. Afterward, they all came out to see the truck up close. A boy asked if he could sit inside. I let him. His smile stretched wide as he held the steering wheel. "It smells like history," he said. "That's oil and time," I replied. "They blend real nice." Calvin met me outside later that day, leaning on his car. "You realize you just gave a sermon to the next generation?" "Didn't mean to." "Maybe not," he said, "but you planted something, the kind that grows roots." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the garage, staring at the truck under that same single light. The air smelled of dust and motor oil. I remembered my wife's hands cleaning the same hood before Sunday service. I remembered my kids learning to drive on this same seat. The past felt close, not haunting, just present, like it had been waiting patiently to be acknowledged. The next day, a letter came from the mayor's office again, an invitation this time. "We're establishing the Fulton County Heritage Exhibit," it read. "Your truck has been nominated as part of the permanent local history collection." I stared at the letter for a long while. It was a strange feeling, pride mixed with loss. They wanted to display her, park her behind glass, make her something to look at instead of use. That evening, I showed the letter to Calvin. "You gonna say yes?" he asked. "I don't know," I said quietly. "Feels like putting her in a museum would stop her story too early." He nodded, but it also let more folks hear it. I looked out at the driveway, at the truck catching the orange light of sunset. "Maybe," I said, "but things that still run shouldn't be turned into statues." A few days later, I drove to the courthouse myself, letter in hand. The mayor's assistant met me in the lobby. "Mr. Grant, we're honored. You'll be preserving history." "With all due respect," I said, "she's still making history." The woman blinked. "Sir?" "She ain't done yet," I said simply, and turned to leave. That night, Calvin stopped by again. "So you told him no?" "Yep." He grinned. "Knew you would." We sat on the porch as the streetlights flickered on. The world was cooling down, the scent of autumn wood smoke drifting through the air. "You think folks ever understand what this all meant?" Calvin asked. "But maybe not right away," I said. "But one day when something breaks, they'll remember that not everything needs replacing. Some things just need care." A few weeks later, the flood anniversary came around. The church held a small memorial, photos of that night, candles for the ones who'd lost Tomims. I drove the truck to the same intersection where it had once pulled Calvin's SUV free. The road was dry now, repaved and gleaming. I parked, stepped out, and stood for a long moment, the hum of cicadas thick in the night. Calvin joined me, holding a thermos of coffee. "Hard to believe it's been a year," he said. "Harder to believe we ever needed a storm to see each other, right?" I answered. He nodded, quiet. We stood there while headlights passed, reflecting on the chrome. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled faintly, just enough to remind us of what once was. But I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I placed my hand on the hood and whispered, "Whatever comes next, we're ready." Because this time we weren't just survivors. We were prepared. The year after the flood carried a strange peace, the kind that only comes once everything fragile has already been tested. Most folks would have moved on, but for me, life still revolved around that truck and the quiet lessons she kept teaching. One Saturday morning, I was under the hood tightening the belts when Calvin stopped by with 2 cups of coffee. "You ever take a break, Harold?" he asked. I grinned. "Breaks get rusty." He laughed. "Figures. Hey, guess who called me? That county journalist, the one who interviewed you. She's working on a follow-up story. Wants to do a short documentary." I raised an eyebrow. "Documentary?" "Yeah. Film crew, interviews, the whole thing. She said the theme's resilience through legacy." "Thought of you right away." I wiped my hands on a rag. Legacy's a big word for a man just keeping his truck alive, Calvin smiled. Maybe that's why it matters. 2 weeks later, they showed up. 3 young people with cameras, lights, and notepads. They set up on my porch, polite and professional. The lead reporter, the same young woman from before, said softly, "Mr. Grant, we want to capture not just what you did, but what you believe." I nodded. "All right, long as you don't add background music that makes me sound like I'm leaving the planet." They laughed. They filmed me in the garage, on the porch, even out on the road. Calvin joined too, giving his version of the story. "Man drove through chest-high water without blinking," he said proudly. "Didn't just save me. Saved a whole street's worth of pride." The reporter asked, "Mr. Grant, do you think this truck represents something bigger?" I thought for a long moment. Yeah, it represents endurance. Folks these days think everything's disposable. Cars, jobs, people. But things built with care outlast trends. The trick is to keep maintaining, even when nobody's watching. That line made it into the final cut. The documentary went up online a month later. 15 minutes long, simple editing, raw sound. The opening shot was my truck idling under the same oak tree from that storm. The closing shot was me driving down the street at sunset. The title card read, "Iron Faith, a man, a flood, and a truck that wouldn't quit." It blew up overnight. Comments poured in from all over. "Reminds me of my grandfather's pickup." "Faith in motion." "Made me cry and call my dad." Denise sent me a text full of heart emojis. "Told you the world needed this." The following Sunday, Reverend Coleman mentioned it in his sermon. "Faith," he said, "ain't just about words. Sometimes it's oil on the hands, mud on the tires, and patience under pressure." After service, folks lined up to take pictures with me and the truck. One little boy asked shyly, "Mr. Harold, can I touch it?" "Go ahead," I said. "She don't mind." He ran his hand across the fender and whispered, "It feels warm." "Faith'll do that," I told him. But not everyone was clapping. A few city folks from the development office started sniffing around again, talking about modernization, green zones, reallocation. One afternoon, a man in a gray suit stopped by, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Grant, we're considering offering cash incentives for residents who trade in older vehicles for eco-friendly models." I smiled politely. "Appreciate the offer." He nodded. "You'd be doing your part for the environment." "Sir," I said, "I've been doing my part for 50 years, fixing instead of throwing away. That's the best recycling there is." He didn't have an answer for that. When he left, Calvin whistled low. "You hit him with logic and dignity." I chuckled. "Old engines, old arguments, both run better when kept clean." Weeks turned into months, and fall returned again, softer this time, calmer. Leaves carpeted the road, and the evening air smelled like smoke and distant barbecue. One late evening, I was sitting in the truck, listening to the gospel station, the Temptations' "Stand By Me" sliding through static, when Calvin knocked on the window. "Man, they just announced it," he said. "Announced what?" "The city council's naming that stretch of Maple Avenue after you, Harold Grant Way." I froze. "You serious?" He grinned. "As a heart attack. They even printed it in the Gazette." I didn't know what to say. My name on a street sign, not because I ran for office or built a business, but because I stayed ready when the water rose. That weekend, they held a small ceremony. The mayor spoke, the clerk smiled, and a crowd gathered around as they unveiled the sign. Harold Grant Way, dedicated 2026. I looked at it and shook my head. Never thought a man could get his own street just by keeping a truck running. Calvin clapped my back. "Wasn't just the truck, Harold. It was what it stood for." When the cameras turned off and the people left, I stayed for a while, watching the light hit the sign. The sky turned bold, and I thought of my wife, of Denise, of every storm I'd driven through just to keep going. That night, before turning in, I wrote another line in my journal. "Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what still works after you're gone." Winter crept back into Georgia with its quiet breath. Mist on the windows, thin frost tracing the edges of the mailbox. and the kind of chill that made every sound seem sharper. But the street named after me felt warmer than ever. Harold Grant Way had become more than a sign. It was a story people carried in their mouths like a prayer they didn't know they were saying. Most mornings, I'd step out to see folks walking slower past the truck, some taking photos, others just touching the door like it was some kind of relic. I didn't stop them. Maybe it gave them hope. Maybe it reminded them of something they'd lost, a time when things were built to endure. Calvin came by one morning with his usual grin and 2 coffees. "Harold, you ever think about writing all this down? I mean, a book or something. You already got the street, the documentary. All that's left is the paperback." I laughed, and man, my life's got too much grease for pages. He shrugged. "Then dictate it. Denise can help. Folks need to hear it straight from you before someone else tries to tell it wrong." I thought about that all day. He wasn't wrong. These stories, mine, the trucks, the flood, they weren't just memories. They were lessons. Quiet ones. Ones you could miss if you weren't listening slow enough. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my old tape recorder, the same one I'd used to record gospel services decades ago. I pressed the red button and started talking. My voice came out low and even, like the hum of a motor that's been running its whole life. "I was born in '69, I began, back when men learned to fix before they learned to buy. My dad used to say, 'If it breaks, it's testing your patience, not your wallet.' He was right." The recorder whirred, steady. I told everything. The flood, the rescue, Calvin's change of heart, even the county clerk who saved me with a few strokes of a keyboard. I spoke until midnight, pausing only when emotion caught in my throat. Not sadness, just weight. The kind you feel when you realize your life turned into something worth repeating. A week later, Denise drove down from Birmingham to visit. She brought a folder with her, transcripts she'd typed from the tapes. "Daddy," she said, smiling, "this is more than a story. This is a record." I looked at the neat pages and felt a strange pride. "Guess we're filing one more case, huh?" She laughed. "Yeah, case number 2026-0001, the road that remembered." We spent the weekend together, cooking, laughing, reading through the words. At one point, she looked at the truck through the kitchen window and said softly, "You think Mama would have believed all this?" I smiled. She'd have said it took long enough. Sunday afternoon, Calvin joined us for dinner. Collard greens, cornbread, and baked chicken. Between bites, he said, "You know, Harold, I've been thinking about that foundation idea again, for real this time. Disaster prep, community workshops, maybe mentorship programs for young folks who want to learn hands-on work." I leaned back, curious. "You serious?" "Serious as that flood was. We could call it the Iron Faith Initiative." Denise clapped softly. "That's perfect." I thought about it for a long moment. "All right," I said finally, "but no fancy titles for me, just mechanical advisor." Calvin grinned. "Deal." Within months, it became real. Flyers went up around town. Kids came to the workshops to learn about car maintenance, generator repairs, and flood safety. The old community center that once handed out sandbags was now filled with tools and laughter. One afternoon, a young boy about 12 stayed behind after class. He looked at me shyly and said, "Mr. Grant, can I see the truck?" "Course you can." He walked around it slow, eyes wide. "She don't look like the new ones." "Nope," I said. "That's what makes her special." He pointed at the scratches. "Why don't you fix those?" I crouched down beside him. "Because they're not broken. They're proof." He nodded like he understood something bigger than what I said. That evening, when the sun dipped behind the oaks, Calvin stood beside me in the fading light. "You ever notice," he said, "how that truck brought the whole block together?" "Yeah," I replied. "She pulled more than cars that night." The truth sat heavy in the air. Not sad, not sweet, just real. Later that week, I got a letter from the Georgia Historical Society. They wanted to archive my documents, the original title, the county case file, even the tow chain from the rescue. I smiled at that last part. The chain had been sitting in my garage all year, cleaned but still stained with rust from the floodwater. I mailed back a single note. Thank you kindly, but those things are still working. Harold Grant. Because I knew the story wasn't meant to end in a museum, or even in print. It was meant to keep running, the way engines do when they're cared for with faith instead of fear. That night I drove down the empty road, my road, slow, windows down, gospel humming low. The lights glowed off wet pavement, and for a moment I felt like every mile of my life had been leading to this stretch of street. When I parked, I looked up at the sign again. Harold Grant Way. It gleamed faintly under the moon, like the world was nodding back. The day the Iron Faith Initiative marked its first full year, the neighborhood looked alive in a way it hadn't in decades. The old lawns were trimmed, porches freshly painted, kids learning to sandwood instead of scroll screens. I sat on my porch that morning, coffee steaming in my hand, watching as volunteers loaded supplies into the community van, the same van Calvin bought using the grant we'd earned. The truck sat under the oak tree, shining in her own quiet way. She didn't need wax or chrome. Her story did the shining for her. Calvin came jogging over, grinning like a man who'd found his calling. Big day, Harold. Channel 7's coming. They're going to film the kids changing tires and doing safety drills. I smiled. As long as they don't call it Harold's Heroes again. He laughed. Too late. The banner's already printed. The laughter hung warm between us. Then he got serious. You know something? I used to think a man was measured by how much he owned. Now I think it's how much he maintains. You taught me that. I nodded slowly. Maintenance is just respect in motion. He looked down, almost shy. Still can't believe I once laughed at that truck. I sipped my coffee. I can. You just didn't know better yet. He chuckled. Fair enough. By noon, the community center was packed. Kids practiced using hydraulic jacks while older volunteers showed how to prep emergency kits. Someone played Marvin Gaye on a small speaker. The smell of barbecue and motor oil filled the air, oddly comforting, like history and hope sharing the same space. During the event, the same county clerk who'd helped me years ago showed up with a sealed envelope. Mr. Grant, she said with a smile, I'm retiring next month. Thought you might like to have this. I opened it. Inside was a certified copy of my original rescue case. She'd written a note in neat blue pen. Some records belong in archives. Others belong in the hands that earned them. I felt something tighten in my chest, gratitude mixed with memory. Thank you, I said softly. She smiled. You showed us what civil service is supposed to mean. That evening, when the crowd thinned out and the music faded, I walked to the truck. The air was heavy with the scent of rain coming. I could feel it in my bones. Thunder grumbled far off, slow and distant, like a heartbeat from the horizon. Calvin stood nearby, watching the clouds. You think it'll flood again? Maybe, I said. Storms always come back. That's how they remind us who we are. He nodded quietly. If it does, you ready? I looked at the truck, her tires still firm, her chain coiled in the back, that badge of emergency transport operator still hanging from the mirror. We stay ready. A light drizzle began to fall. Kids laughed, running through the drops, shouting goodbyes. The sound echoed the way it had that first night, except this time, nobody was afraid. They knew what to do. They'd learned. Later, when everyone was gone, I sat inside the truck, engine off, just listening to the rain tap against the windshield. The street sign gleamed under the lamplight, Harold Grant Way. Below it, someone had tied a small ribbon with a handwritten note. Thank you for teaching us that old doesn't mean done. I ran my thumb over the steering wheel, tracing the worn leather. My wife's note was still taped to the glove box. Don't ever doubt what's still running. I whispered, I didn't, baby. Not once. The rain thickened, then softened again. I thought about all the storms, the flood, the doubts, the tests of pride, and realized they'd all led to this moment of quiet. No spotlight, no cameras, no applause. Just peace, earned honestly. I turned the key one last time that night, and the engine hummed steady, proud, alive. The sound rolled out into the dark like a hymn too strong to fade. Calvin called out from his porch. "She still sings, huh?" "Always," I said. "She just waits for the right verse." He raised his coffee mug in salute. "To old things that still work." I raised mine back. "To faith that doesn't rest." The thunder drifted farther away, leaving only the gentle rhythm of rain. I leaned back, let out a breath, smiled. Because in the end, that's what the flood had done. Not drown us, but clean us. Not break us, but bind us. And as long as that truck still started, the story wasn't over. It was just idling, waiting for the next pianta. If this story spoke to you like the video, subscribe and share your thoughts below.